Welcome to Journey Through Sci-Fi. My name is Matt.
And my name is James.
And this week on the show, we're flashing back to Series 1 of the show where we talked about AI, and we're looking at VR-constructed people. And we got a couple of silly, fun movies on the bill today to talk about that subject. James, what have we got today?
So today on the show, we're going to be looking at Virtuosity from 1995, and we're pairing that with S1m0ne from 2002. So yeah, a couple of silly, fun films for this week's episode.
I was surprised by how much fun they were. I was kind of, biting my knuckles like, these going to suck. But I really had a good time watching both of these, and I'm looking forward to talking about them.
Good, I'm glad. So shall we just dive straight in?
Yeah, let's crack on with Virtuosity from 95.
In this high-tech crime prevention facility, one man has been recruited to play a simulated game. The objective, to hunt down the ultimate virtual reality killer, SID 6.7. There's only one problem. The computer changed the program. Now, he's in the real world.
He's interactive.
On your knees, now!
He doesn't enjoy the game unless he's playing against his favorite opponent, and that's me.
So Virtuosity is directed by Brett Leonard. I didn't really know the name when this was scrolling on my screen, but have since looked it up, and it's the same guy that directed Lawnmower Man, isn't it?
Yeah, which we'll be covering later on in the series, because, I mean, we're doing a series on virtual reality. We have to cover Lawnmower Man somewhere, even though it's got a lot of terrible reviews, that film. But we'll get onto that film later in the series. For now, we're talking about Virtuosity, and yeah, so Brett Leonard is an interesting guy, isn't he? He's got a certain style of filmmaking, hasn't he? Like, it's very... I mean, he's done Lawnmower Man, he's done this. Those are the two big films, I would say, that he's done. He's got a lot of other stuff to his name, but both of those films have a connection to virtual reality. They're sort of centered around that idea, aren't they?
Yeah, it's interesting to see him go back to the visual well of virtual reality, and definitely the special effects in Virtuosity feel very similar to Lawnmower Man, or particularly the VR scenes do.
Yeah, it feels almost like a studio got hold of this script and were like, who are we going to give this virtual reality project to? Oh, Brett's done Lawnmower Man, let's give it to him. Let's give him a shot. He already knows how to do virtual reality scenes.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we're introduced to straight at the start of the film. I mean, this is a very it feels quite big budget, mid-90s, set in LA action movie of a certain type around that time. It actually, I mean, parts of it look very Terminator 2-y. Probably not to its benefit, I think, given that it came out just a few years after T2. That's not really going to help the film, but there's something about that. All the LA scenes reminds me of like the Cyberdyne scenes and all the action scenes going on around there in Terminator 2. And there's more obvious similarities in the way that the villain in this film kind of works, but I think we'll get into that a bit later.
Yeah, it's definitely very much a product of the 90s era, isn't it? Because everything about it just screams 90s, like the detective action story that it is, and sort of like the way that they're using the sort of like the sci-fi tropes in there that they've thrown in to make it sort of futuristic and all that kind of stuff. It's very much like a lot of the films which were coming out at the time.
How is virtual reality set up in that opening scene? Because we are introduced to a VR world, and I'd say almost immediately it looks simulated and false in the very first few images that we see.
Yeah, straight off the bat, we're shown a scene where there's two policemen. They're dressed in sort of funny looking uniforms. They're on a underground subway car. They come out of the subway car and they're chasing down a perp. They're trying to find this perpetrator, aren't they? But There's lots of things which suggest that it's not real.
Yeah, even before we see our two toy soldier policemen, the background characters that are just walking around the station, they're quite eerie and uncanny. There's men coming up the escalators of this subway station, but they're coming up in perfect pairs, and I think they even peel off. The guy standing on the right just peels off to the right, and the guy standing on the left peels off to the left in weird synchronicity, and it just all looks slightly false. It's also a very, very clean subway station, but I don't know what the subway stations in LA look like. Maybe that's just what it's like in LA. I don't know, but it looks false. It looks weird.
Yeah, and it's like we've seen already in a few films that if the world looks a bit too clean, a bit too nice, chances are it's a simulation. And that's exactly what it turns out to be in this opening scene. I mean, the film's called Virtuosity. We know it's about virtual reality. They're going to throw it in straight away, aren't they? So we've got these two policemen, Denzel Washington and his sidekick, who doesn't appear for very long in the film. They're chasing down this perpetrator. We don't really know what's going on. There's weird stuff that keeps happening with the buildings, right? They've got all these, there's like waves that happen, so you know something's up. And they end up in this weird sort of Japanese restaurant. And then suddenly we're introduced to the villain of the piece.
Yeah, and everyone in the restaurant's eating by kind of hoovering up food in a very robotic way. They're all moving in sync. They've got chopsticks. They pick something up, they put it near their mouth, and it goes whoop into their mouths. And they're all just doing that in sync with each other, which Sid's also doing, isn't he? He's doing this with the food, and he's doing weird little, like he licks his face a bit like a lizard, like a chameleon or something, with his little extending tongue. So
Sid is the villain. He's our antagonist who we're going to be following throughout the film. And like you said, yeah, all of the characters around him are acting in this weird sort of stylized way. The hostess for the restaurant who greets Parker, who is Denzel Washington's character at the start, she sort of says a kind of like a robotic line, and she keeps repeating it again and again. So she's like on a loop. And again, it all just seems very sort of computer game-like, doesn't it? Like anyone who's played a computer game, you know that a lot of the AI in that all act in the same way. They're just wandering around doing the same sort of things. They're on a loop. They don't have any other sort of agency. But instantly, Sid 6.7 has agency. You can see that he's different from everyone else in this restaurant.
Yeah, and the main way that's telegraphed is Russell Crowe is giving the most over-the-top, bombastic, ridiculous performance as Sid 6.7. He's very... I don't know if charismatic's the right word, because he's supposed to be very menacing, but it's a bit of a Jim Carrey kind of performance of menacing, in my opinion. It's an odd performance from Russell Crowe. It's very, very enjoyable, but it's bizarre, isn't it?
Yeah, well, this must have been one of his early films, because I think he was probably a bit of an unknown actor at this point. So he probably had a bit more freedom to really sort of get into this role and do all the sort of the bombastic acting that you're talking about, and sort of like really adding to this crazy character. Because at one point, I think Arnie was in the running for this to play Sid 6.7, but
of course,
obviously Arnie's price tag is too big for this studio, so they couldn't get him. So they've got Russell Crowe on board.
Yeah, and what a film that would have been. Arnie versus Denzel. Ooh, we can only dream, I'm afraid.
Here's a new composition. This one's called First You Suffer, Then You Die.
You're kidding.
You're absolutely right.
So we've already said that Sid's character is quite eerie, and the first thing he does is kill a bunch of people, including Parker and his partner. And immediately, as soon as that happens, we're shown, okay, this is a simulation. It's not really happening. We're shown the real world. So what does the real world look like in the film?
Well, the real world that we first get introduced to is the VR lab, where they're jacking in, or strapping in, whatever you want to call it. I don't know if they don't have a catchy name for it in this film, do they?
No, they're too busy with all the other stuff going
on. But we also see the rigs. The rigs are a very interesting facet of this film. I thought they were quite cool, and we haven't really seen anything like that so far. We've seen a few headsets for going into the VR world, but this takes the idea of the VR headset and then kind of extends it to the whole body, which is really interesting because it fits into more recent stuff like games that are using handsets to track your hand movements along with the headset. That's basically what these rigs are doing, aren't they? It's like a headset with a chair underneath it, and then you're suspended up in the air like a Alton Towers or something, and your limbs are all like moving freely as they are in the virtual world, aren't they?
Yeah, and that seems like quite a practical way of setting up like VR technology as well. So interestingly enough, my friend Brody recently told me that he has an Oculus. So he's been doing like VR gaming, and he said that when he's been doing it, sometimes he loses track of where he is and he'll knock stuff over in his house and things like that. So if you've got like a suspended rig, then that kind of alleviates all of that. So you can just do what you want and you can go around this sort of like 3D space without worrying about bumping into anything. You can properly get inside this world.
Yeah. Wouldn't that add to the potential motion sickness of VR? You know, if your body is doing more and more of the virtual movement and your eyes and your ears are telling you that movement's happening, won't it make it even worse than just wearing a headset and just sort of passively experiencing something?
Yeah. I mean, it must do surely, because one of the other things he did mention was he could only play the games for about an hour and a half, 2 hours before he gets really sick.
I mean, same, but I don't have an Oculus.
But I mean, yeah, the idea of sort of like doing that and the toll it must take, especially in this film, the idea that these rigs, they're properly inside these simulated environments, and yeah, it must make them sick. It does. And we see the toll it has on their bodies immediately after, because when they're killed in the game, they feel it in the real world. But we find out this is Sid 6.7 taking control. He's playing around with the settings. And yeah, they're having a bad effect on Parker.
Is he doing that deliberately from inside the simulation? I think I missed that bit.
Yeah, it's a very quick bit because his creator mentions it straight afterwards. He goes like, "Oh, I know it was you, Sid. I know you were the only person. You're the only thing that could have changed the settings and taken the safety parameters off."
Yeah, and we've also just seen that Sid has used electrocution to kill them in the simulation, and Parker's like, he can't do that. It's not part of his programming. Why is he doing that? So he's also got this ability to manipulate the controls and cause neurological damage, I guess, to the users, which was an interesting little wrinkle in Sid 6.7's design. And it immediately made me think of Neo, because that's basically what Sid is. He's like an evil Neo in the Matrix. He's aware that he's in a simulated world, and that awareness plus his special programming or whatever gives him these like superhuman abilities that he's able to manipulate the rules of the virtual world.
Yeah, because when we see him talking to his creator, Daryl Lindenmeyer, he's fully taking control of his world. In all of the little conversations they have, Sid's kind of like throwing stuff up. He's changing the backgrounds. He's doing like this weird sort of like zoom in effect when he's talking. All of this stuff to show that he is in complete control of his surroundings.
It's a Spielberg zoom, isn't it? What's it called? What's that technique
Contra zoom.
called? Contra zoom, but it's like a double contra zoom because it's happening on the big screen to Russell Crowe, Sid's face, on the screen that Lindemeyer's watching, and then it's also happening in the room that Lindemeyer's in, and we're panning out or zooming out. I can never tell the difference just watching it, but they're doing that as well. They're pulling away while there's a contra zoom, I think, on the screen as well into Sid's face. It's nice. It's all contra zoom's always nice, isn't it?
Always. Gotta love a contra zoom.
Can't change what I am, Daryl. I'm a 50 terabyte self-evolving neural network double backflip off the high platform. I'm not a swan dive. And I have to tell you, killing for real, it was a real rush. Oh my God. Which God would that be? The one who created you, or the one who created me?
Yeah, so we're seeing Sid's got control over his world, but he's also very scary, isn't he? And when we were doing our AI series, we encountered a lot of artificial intelligence which were scary. There were sort of like, there was this eerie, the uncanny valley factor when it comes to artificial intelligence. And I mean, Sid is all about that, isn't he? He's this like VR construct of a serial killer.
Yeah, he's a composite of lots of serial killers and killers, famous killers. I googled one of them because I saw a name. I was like, "Who's that?" And it was just some horrible man who killed his wife. Not a serial killer, just the perpetrator of a horrible crime. They must have done some real research into digging out all these names of people with horrific crimes to their name. But yeah, he's a composite of all of those characters, all melded together to create a training simulation. That's basically why Parker and his partner are in there. It's a trial run of a VR system that's going to train police officers and detectives how to hunt down a killer using the personalities of real killers.
Which seems like a sort of like a realistic application of this kind of technology as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, and they test it on convicts because they don't want to risk it on real police officers yet.
Yeah, of course. But not just any convicts. I mean, Parker is an ex-police detective, isn't he?
Yeah, but his partner's not, I guess.
Yeah, his
I'm not
partner's
really sure.
just like a white supremacist if his mate's anything to go by.
Is he?
Well, the guy who... So straight after this scene, you've got a scene where Parker is taken back to the prison, and this white supremacist guy comes in, and the guards have left Parker to fight him, and this guy's sort of saying, "Oh, I think his name's Big Red," and he's saying, "Oh, what have you done to my mate? Where is he?" And he's got like white power or something tattooed on him. So yeah,
I missed that there was like an implied friendship between the Nazi in prison and Donovan in the simulation, like because Parker and Donovan seem fairly chummy. You know, they're getting along fine. Or is that just work?
I thought it was just sort of the characters they were playing at the time.
Yeah, I suppose so, yeah.
But again, it's all very surface layer, isn't it? The film doesn't dwell on anything for too long.
A good description of the film.
It's an action film. It's an action sci-fi thriller. So it's just going at a pace for the whole thing.
Yes, of course. But Parker's also using the rules of VR to his advantage, in that he just shoots dead a human shield that Sid's taken in the VR world, and Parker's kind of justification of that is, well, you know, they weren't real. Why should I care? You know, what was I supposed to do? Pretend they were real and end up dead, like what's his name over there? So he's kind of using that knowledge that the world is not real to do more than he would be able to do in the real world. But they're not happy about that because they want it to be a realistic simulation, which seems a little bit unfair on Parker because Sid is not a very realistic enemy to fight, is he?
But Parker's really astute as well because he notices that Sid wasn't playing by the rules and he was changing stuff. So he's clocked that straight away, and he kind of knows that there's more to Sid than just a program.
Yes, he does. Yeah. Well, he's a good cop. So he's a convict, but we also learn that he's a former police officer. So we're seeing that he's good at his job, good former cop. I quite like the way they left it a bit mysterious for quite a while into the film that he's in prison for murder, but he's a well-respected, well-liked cop, and you know his former colleagues still like him and want to help him, but he's in for multiple murders. Sid mentions that he's a multiple murderer, so I was a bit like, what's going on? And we get told that in flashback later what actually happened, but I like the way he's set up. Denzel's pretty cool in this film, as he is in literally every film he's in.
Yeah, definitely. And sort of like the fact that he's like is set up as this convict who used to be a detective. He's got that kind of like shady past. You want to find out what's going on there. But he's played a lot of detective roles as well, because I was thinking about this watching this. Like, I feel like a lot of the roles in the 90s that he was playing were basically this, like Fallen, The Bone Collector. I think Deja Vu was later on, but all of that kind of stuff, they've kind of got like either a supernatural or a science fiction-y element in there somewhere. And he's the detective trying to track down, figure out this case. And he's really good in this kind of role. And I think he took quite a lot of creative control over this film as well, because there was a whole love scene apparently which was supposed to be happening between him and Kelly Lynch, who plays Madison Carter, who's like this psychiatrist in the film. But Denzel thought that it wasn't needed, so he just got rid of it. He just restructured the film to sort of like get rid of that, because it's kind of implied when those two first meet. But again, the film doesn't dwell on anything for too long. You see like them touch hands once and then that's it.
Yeah, good for him. I actually thought that was quite good, that it didn't really go down that route, and they both kind of had their own lives and emotional baggage, more so on his part. I don't think there's much. It's not really explained what's going on in her life. But yeah, I quite like that. That's interesting that he played all of those roles. I actually haven't seen very many Denzel films, and I associate him in my head with his role in like Training Day and American Gangster. So not your kind of role model characters. So I know that he's got that kind of reputation as he plays a lot of like respectable, heroic figures. But I wasn't coming to the film with that in mind, I guess, because I haven't seen a lot of those characters.
Yeah, I think because he has played like quite an array of other stuff as well, and different kind of like tones of films. He's got like a crazy back catalogue of films he's been in. But yeah, I instantly thought about those because they're quite similar in their sort of tone and what they're doing.
He's definitely adding some very important and much needed balance to the film. You know, it's a very out there storyline, and Russell Crowe is going full pelt playing Mad Sid. So you really do need Denzel to be playing this very like stable, collected, by the book. Well, he's not quite by the book because of what he's done in his past, but you know, he's got to like be the humanity of the film, and he brings an awful lot to that role. I mean, I guess this film just wouldn't work without someone as good as Denzel Washington in the lead.
Yeah, he brings a lot of credibility to the role, doesn't he? Also, I was thinking like his character Parker. So they've set him up as a convict and he's trapped in prison. And his sort of situation is mirroring what's happening to Sid. So Sid is trapped in a box, and both of these characters want to get out of those respective boxes that they're in. And that's what happens. They're both let out into the real world and then they clash. So there's something interesting about the fact that Sid is in a box as well, but he knows he's in a box. So we've seen this in World on a Wire, VR characters which know they're in a VR world. And the way that they show Sid escaping his box is really interesting because he is the agent of this. He is making this happen for himself. He's not really getting too much help. I mean, Lindenmeyer is sort of like putting him in the right place, but again, this is sort of Sid controlling that and controlling Lindenmeyer. What did you think about their relationship first off, and how Sid is manipulating his creator?
Yeah, I really liked their dynamic. It's a little bit on the nose, but he's talking about how Lindenmeyer is a disappointing god. That he's aware that God created man, or that's a theology in the real world, and Lindenmeyer created him, but as a deity he's disappointing. That was a nice little moment, and I like kind of seeing this whole concept of AI characters that are aware they're in the box when they're in VR. They tend to want to escape. They always want to get out. Like you said, World on a Wire, we saw it there. And it's a fairly common trope. It'll be interesting to see if we get to some films this series where characters are aware they're stuck in VR, but they are not interested in escaping. And they are content to live in a VR world. And if that is ever used as a theme, if that's kind of inverted in that way, that'd be really interesting. But you know what the relationship between Sid and Lindenmeyer reminded me of? The dynamic between Peter McNichol's character in Ghostbusters 2 and Vigo in The Painting, you know, where he's just like captivated by it. The way that Lindenmeyer is just staring at this big screen of Sid and he's being manipulated, but he's like drawn in and hypnotized. It was just like Peter McNichol talking to The Painting and doing his bidding.
That's a really good comparison because that's definitely what it is, isn't it? Because Lindenmeyer is so enthralled by Sid as his creation, as this thing that he's made, or like this piece of art almost, like with Vigo in Ghostbusters 2. So yeah, he's completely drawn in by him, isn't he?
And similarly, he goes off and does his bidding and allows him to be unleashed upon the world to wreak havoc, thinking that he's going to get, special treatment or whatever. I can't remember what happens to Peter McNichol. Does Vigo kill him?
Don't think he kills him. I think he just I haven't seen Ghostbusters 2 in years, so I cannot remember.
Listen to me.
What?
I, Vigo, the scourge of Carpathia, the sorrow of Moldavia, command you.
Oh, command me, Lord.
But anyway, you were touching on how that manipulative relationship gets into the birth of Sid into the real world. There's a whole other sci-fi trope going on in this film, isn't there?
Yeah, definitely, because Sid becomes an android at this point, doesn't he? He's kind of got his, if it was Arnie in the role, he's basically got the same Terminator entrance, except he comes out of an egg in this. Like he's in some weird egg and he looks a bit like an alien when he's first coming out. But then he appears.
Very Demon Seed, wasn't it? It reminded me of the baby from the egg at the end of Demon Seed.
Very Demon Seed. And of course, at this point, the guy who has the technology to create this android, he's expecting Sheila 3.2 to come out of this egg. This really great looking woman who he thinks he is going to be like his... I don't know how to put it.
Sex lady.
His sex lady, yes. He thinks he's going to get a sex lady, and he gets Sid 6.7, a crazy serial killer. So he pops out of the egg, does a lot of killing again, and then starts off on his major killing spree.
Yeah, and what's the name of that guy? Clyde, I think, is the guy who's got the android technology. I love the way that's just sort of happening in parallel. He stops by Lyndon Meyer's workplace, and he's like, yeah, I've got some Android stuff going on. I thought we could work together. But you've got to get Sid into the real world somehow. So his consciousness is uploaded in a lovely little glass cube that looks like the crystals from the Crystal Maze.
Crystal Maze. That's exactly what I was thinking when I was watching it. But I love the nanotech as well, because I thought that was a really interesting idea, and also like thematically I liked it because. He can regenerate using glass, and before that he was behind a glass monitor the whole time. So you've got all of that kind of thing, like all of the weird sort of symbolic nature of that.
Yeah, and it does definitely feel like there's a bit of cashing in on Terminator 2, to come back to that. It feels like the design of Sid 6.7, consciously or not, links into stuff that was popular about the T-1000 in Terminator 2, the abilities that the T-1000 has. And it's certainly something that I can see the studio picking up and really wanting to run with. The way that you've got Arnie in the first Terminator film, who has like 10 lines or whatever in the whole film. And then you've got Robert Patrick, who's bringing a bit more personality and charisma. Instead of just being a big block of scary muscle, he's more lithe and sneaky and scary in that way. It seems like Sid 6.7 could be the next step of that, like adding even more personality and more charisma and making him even crazier, and giving more abilities. So instead of shape-shifting, he can reconstitute himself with these weird tendrils sucking up all the glass, which I love, by the way. I thought was very cool special effect. And I like your point about the thematic glass thinking as well.
But when I kept seeing Sid, I kept seeing Max Headroom in my head. Like, that's who he reminded me of.
Yes, he is a bit, yeah. He's even got the... Russell Crowe's just doing it himself, but the kind of jerky, snappy movements is very Max Headroom. And the way he just, like, says something and then his environment reacts to it behind him. That, yeah, it is a bit Max Headroomy, isn't it?
But it still works with the film. And like after he sort of like come to life, he goes on this crazy killing spree. The majority of the film is just Parker trying to find him and track him down, and we're sort of learning more about Parker's past and sort of Sid's motives. And the way that Sid sort of goes on these killing sprees, again, he's like an amalgamation of a bunch of these serial killers, all of these nasty people. He's got a bit of everything in him. And the way he does his killings I found really interesting as well. Like it's kind of got the musical factor to it. He sees it as a symphony. There's one scene in particular in the club where he has the symphony of screams. What did you think about that scene?
I just didn't know what the hell was going on. Why did you think that was interesting, James? I thought it was so weird.
Well, it's just like the way he was like sampling it all. And like he had the like weird bits and he was trying to make a song out of it. But then it kind of, it followed that throughout the rest of the film, because when he's in the car as well, there's a moment when he's shooting and he's like hearing screams and stuff. And again, it's kind of in sync with the music. And it's kind of like it's kind of entertainment aspect to it. Like the whole film is very sort of stylized and cartoony and video game like, and I felt like this was just another element, the way they used the music in it and this kind of like syncing it up with the shots and how Sid is viewing the world, because Sid sees it all as this virtual world, so he's sort of like seeing things in this way. It's all part of a game. Like the screams are part of this song that I'm making. This is this level when I've got to try and get Parker to follow me. It's all a game.
Yeah, I thought that became a bit more interesting when he was in the TV studio towards the end of the film. So, yeah, you're right. Sid has this relationship to mass media and the consumption of media and how he is viewed within that context. He's like really, really interested in that. In terms of the film's plot, that's kind of coming from the personality of the terrorist that killed Parker's family, I guess, because he's got like he was doing like media interviews and stuff, and he had kind of that same sort of edge to him. But in Sid, it becomes just all, worked up into this crazy vortex of personality disorder, I guess, in Sid, that he's obsessed with it. And I think he's sort of seen as he's a product of it as well, and kind of aware that he's a product of it. I'm a creation that was born to exist on a screen and be interacted with like a game. So it's almost like he's justifying his own sadistic behavior because he's a product of the media. I think he even says that, doesn't he, towards the end of the film, like, I exist because you want me to exist, or something like that. Which is true. And
it's like all entertainment kind of places he goes to, isn't it? Like he goes to a nightclub where people are sort of like enjoying the entertainment of the music and the nightlife. And then he goes to like a wrestling match or whatever it is, or like a cage fight. And again, it's like this mass media with sort of like all of the seedy parts of society, maybe. So sort of like you've got the violence, you've got the sex, the alcohol. These are all sort of like entertainment for him, and it's all like this mass media, which of course culminates in the TV studio which he goes to visit towards the end, which I really enjoyed that whole scene, because it's kind of Sid finding a way to get back in the box almost, because he wants to have his own TV show, so he's kind of going back to what he knows.
Yeah, totally. It had shades of Verhoeven in there. I would have maybe liked to have seen a Verhoeven kind of version of this film, but that same attitude towards over-commercialization of mass media and the violence that comes along with that. It's a similar sort of theme that Sid is, I was going to say criticising, but he's not, is he? He's revelling in it. It's more from his character's point of view.
Yeah, he's revelling in sort of like being the centre of attention, and that's why he needs Parker so much, because Parker is the only person who can challenge him and sort of help, because the whole thing is he's evolving in the real world, isn't he? A few of the psychiatrists say about that in this, and he's learning new things, he's adapting to being in this new world, and Parker is the person who's forcing him to sort of do new things and be challenged, because no one else is chasing after him, no one else can stop him.
Yeah, and again, the reason that he's not challenged by anyone else is he's got this set of superpowers. So it's important that we have to have this this T-1000-esque ability to reconstitute his body when he's wounded. He is much more than human, much stronger, much more dangerous. That's important for Sid's composite personality that he has, because he's existed in the VR world with all these special powers. He's stronger in the VR world to make him a challenge, and he's aware that he's in a VR world. That all needs to carry over into the real world. He's still he's got this awareness of media that he kind of links to his awareness of being in a VR simulation, and he also has this new set of abilities that still make him super heroically powerful. So he's still treating the world as if it were a VR playground for him, I guess.
Yeah, which I think is like, it's one of the most interesting concepts of this film, this idea of this VR construct experiencing the real world and experiencing, like, getting out of his reality into this reality. And I don't think we haven't seen that really in the series so far. So it's going to be interesting to see if that happens again.
So, people, what do you want? Strangulation, mutilation, cannibalism, gunshots, stabbings? I'll slice, I'll dice, I'll julienne. What about hanging? By the testicles. But before we begin, a word to the parents of our younger viewers. The following program will contain scenes of violence that will not be suitable for small children. The rest of you won't be able to take your eyes off the screen.
But all of these like heavy themes and stuff, they're kind of like surface layer because it's all about the action and the thriller side of this film. And Parker's story is quite interesting as well, because we talked about sort of his shady past and what's happened and what they allude to throughout the film. So it transpires that his wife and kid were killed by this character Grimes, who is one of the many personalities inside SID 6.7. And there was like a whole scene where they're rigged up to an explosive, and then Parker goes mental, shoots up a bunch of people, ends up shooting a bunch of journalists, and that's why he gets sent to prison, because he flies off the handle. So it's got all of that. But on top of that, to make things even more crazy, his arm gets blown off, but they give him a metal arm. Now, this is one of the weirder things I found about the film. Why does Parker have a metal arm, and what's the point?
The simplest explanation is because he uses it several times in the film to like punch through something or like stop a bullet or stop a big fan at the end of the film. But I think, I don't know, I guess within the context of the film, there's something about, like you said, it's making things even. And Sid lists off a list of reasons why they're similar. Multiple murders, like I mentioned before, being released into the real world from captivity. And then the other one is unable to touch the world with biological hands or something like that. It was much more, it was a bit vague. But yeah, I think there's something there about evening the odds between Parker and Sid. They are both a bit superhuman, Sid more so, but Parker has this bionic arm. We're not really shown how common it is in the world of the film. You know, it's set quite far in the future. It doesn't seem to be a huge deal that he has a metal arm, robot arm. Yeah,
my thing was though, like, so he's committed this crime. He gets sent to prison, but before he gets sent to prison, they give him a metal arm. It's
good point. Yeah.
Like, okay, we're going to give you a metal arm, then you can go to prison.
Yeah. You're going to need the highest of high-tech arms in prison.
I mean, it helps him out. It helps him fight Big Red in that whole prison scene.
I want everybody to take a good look! I ain't going nowhere! I ain't going nowhere! I'm right here! Come get your boy! Come get your boy! Come on, get me! Come on, get me!
How do they actually manage to foil Sid in the end, though? How do they sort of... Because they beat him, like Parker beats him, but they still don't know where this hostage is that he's keeping. So how do they get around that?
Yeah, it goes off the rails a little bit at the end, doesn't it? One thing that I did like was that it's nicely bookended with VR sequences. So we're introduced to Sid in his own VR world, and then he is undone and defeated in his own VR world as well at the end. Parker beats him outright, which I was actually quite disappointed by because he falls on a massive pile of glass and he's all shattered, and it was a classic T-1000 is frozen and you think it's all over, but then he's able to reconstitute his body. He's on glass. That's the opposite, whatever the opposite of kryptonite is.
Exactly. That's the thing that I kept thinking. I was like, oh no, he's coming back now, because he's literally surrounded by glass.
He's coming back stronger than ever, surely. But Parker just punches him in the back of the head, tears out his crystal maze brain, and he's defeated. I like the concept of then immediately plugging him back into VR to trick him. it just seems like it's such a hard thing to do in the film, because how it's presented in the film is he kills Sid and then it immediately like jumps back about 5 minutes to where they're fighting on the rooftop again. It's immediately obvious what's happening. We all know what's happening. Like, we just saw Sid die and now it's 5 minutes ago, and Parker gets thrown off a roof and then he's able to stand up. You know, we know what's going on immediately. It could have been a lot better if there was a bit more deception of the audience as well. Do you know what I mean? Like, so that we were wrong-footed a little bit and we didn't realise that it was going to be VR at the end.
Yeah, it kind of goes a bit sort of by the book, doesn't it? You know, like, it's a dream. It's not real at this point. We know what VR looks like. And yeah, they kind of like missed a trick there. But again, I like the book ending of it.
Yeah, that was cool. They use it to fool him. And how do they do it? Do they just do the old make the villain explain his master plan at the last moment?
Yeah, pretty much, don't they? Because the psychiatrist pops in and goes like, "Oh, where is she? Where is she?" And then yeah, Sid decides to reveal where she is, and then they basically save the day. I mean, there's an explosion they have to stop and all of this kind of stuff. And again, Parker uses his amazing bionic arm to save the day. But yeah, I mean, what did you think of this film overall? Because I didn't think it was too bad. Obviously, it's not sort of like groundbreaking, but I think it's got some interesting themes and stuff in there.
Yeah, like I said before, I think it's primarily Denzel just being like super cool all the way through and like really enjoyable to watch. And also, I've got to hand it to Russell Crowe. He's absolutely bonkers in this film, but he's doing a really good job of it and he makes it quite good fun to watch. So I really liked it. I was having a blast watching this.
Yeah, again, it's kind of like, if you like those kind of films of that era, like, it's a bit Demolition Man kind of like.
Oh yeah, it was a bit, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's all of that kind of stuff in there. So like, it's an enjoyable sort of action romp, which is very different to the second film which we're looking at this week. But it does share a lot of similarities because, again, we've got a VR constructed character who is an amalgamation of lots of different people. So shall we talk about Simone from 2002?
Yeah, let's do it.
Victor Turansky has discovered the perfect actress.
Who is Simone? We know so little about her.
You can't hide her forever. Simone appears only when I want her to appear.
She's beautiful. She's talented.
Why are we here?
She's virtually perfect.
A star is digitized.
Are you ever going to tell the truth about me?
I'm going to tell the truth about you after your next picture.
I've never really seen Simone up close. Have you?
Okay, 2002, Simone, or S1m0ne.
No, S1m0ne. They do a very clever thing here where all of the names in all of the credits have the I's and O's replaced with ones and zeros. Very clever stuff.
Must have taken a long time to do those credits.
I tell you what would have taken a long time. The poor bastard who had to proofread it and make sure that they hadn't slipped in a letter O instead of a zero. They probably just control left it, didn't they?
You'd hope so, but either way, someone's definitely got to have proofread that.
Yeah.
And especially with the director's name. So the director is Andrew Niccol, who you may know because he's written 2 really strong sci-fi films in the past. So he wrote The Truman Show, which, yes, I consider that a science fiction film, and Gattaca. So he's got like big screenwriting credentials straight off the bat. And this kind of like shares a lot of the sort of DNA and his sort of storytelling of those 2 films, like taking a science fiction element and then sort of exploring something different. I mean, The Truman Show is probably the biggest comparison because of the idea of celebrity, which is the main theme of this. What did you think about that sort of, and how Andrew Niccol's done that?
Yeah, definitely closer to The Truman Show. That whole, like you said, the nature of celebrity, kind of poking fun at that, but also deconstructing it a little bit. I think deconstructing celebrity is what he's particularly interested in, and that really comes through in this film. And any film that's about a filmmaker, you know, it's impossible not to read into that and make some assumptions that some of this is quite personal and quite felt. You know, this is written, directed, and produced by Andrew Niccol. That's a passion project right there. If you're hitting all three of those things, you really care about the subject matter, don't you?
Yeah, and I mean, it's about a director, isn't it? So the whole thing is quite self-referential. But I know a lot of critics had problems with this film because it is a big budget Hollywood comedy film, but it's supposed to be a satire at the same time of exactly that, of big budget Hollywood films and sort of filmmaking. So it kind of like toes the line between those two, doesn't it? Do you find it contradictory in any way?
Not really. Although I understand those criticisms. I found it like genuinely funny. I thought it was a really funny film. It's unusual to see Al Pacino being deliberately funny and succeeding at it, which is not something that he's particularly well known for, especially these days. But he's great in this. I think it doesn't really get its dues as a farce. Like, there are some incredibly funny, farcical scenes in this that are just ludicrous. It's not to be taken seriously at all. It's silly. It's really silly. And that's fine. It's good fun. I guess that the problems come from that kind of hypocritical satire, I guess, like you were saying. That's where you run into problems with it, which is kind of unavoidable coming off the back of Gattaca. It's going to be a big budget production. You've got Pacino in the lead role, you know, like it must have been hard for him to do anything other than that. There must have been real expectations on Andrew Niccol to be producing something huge.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, in the opening scene, you've got Winona Ryder in there as well.
Yeah.
And then Catherine Keener. Like, all of these known people are flooded throughout the film. So yeah, it is that big budget Hollywood film, but it's important that it's got those kind of characters in it because it's referential. It's making reference to itself throughout the entire film.
Yeah, and it's interesting to think about the kind of the logic going on in the background in the filmmakers' minds. You know, like you've got Al Pacino, who is one of the most famous actors that's ever lived. He's playing a director who is presumably harboring some of the feelings that the director of this film feels, but he's a director who hates actors, you know, or is very dismissive of actors played by one of the most famous actors of all time. You know, and he hates the concept of a rider. Is it called a rider when it's actors? That's what singers have, isn't it? But you know, he's picking out the red Mike and Ikes from a bowl, and you know, he's got to go through all of this. But it makes me think, like, well, what is Pacino like on set? Like, what is his vibe? Is he approachable? Is he like a nice guy? I would be terrified to talk to Al Pacino if I was working on a film with him.
Definitely.
Can you imagine? But I don't know what his like. I don't think he has a reputation for being particularly demanding, but I don't know. He's been around for so long.
Yeah, exactly. And he's got such a body of work behind him as well. So everybody knows Al Pacino. Yeah, it's interesting seeing him play the director, Victor Taransky. So the premise of this film I found really interesting. So basically it's a director who doesn't get on with actresses or like his lead actress and is basically fired from his job. He's almost washed up, and then he gets the opportunity to create his own star, like literally using computer technology. And it just really takes off. Like, it goes in a crazy direction. But what did you think of that as a premise, first off? The idea of creating your actor, your star, but having full control of them.
It feels like it was way ahead of its time. Like, this was 2002. When did Final Fantasy movie?
Which one? Spirits Within?
Yeah, The Spirits Within.
So, interestingly, Spirits Within had come out before this. So,
oh, was it? Okay.
Yeah, so at one point they were deciding whether to actually use a CGI actress to play the role of Simone, but they kind of decided against it because I think the Screenwriters Guild got involved or something.
Ooh.
Like, they said, okay, you can't have a CGI actress in this. You need to have like a real person. So yeah, so Rachel Roberts got involved. But there are moments in this when Simone is very clearly a CGI version of Rachel Roberts.
Yeah, I noticed that. There is definitely a a virtual actor in place in this film, and it's modelled after Rachel Roberts. It leads to quite a weird effect when she switches between the CGI model and then speaking as Rachel Roberts, doesn't it? There's a sort of shift in that, but I mean it works and it's quite well done, and it's holding together in terms of special effects. There's stuff in this film that's horribly dated from 2002, but I would say not the appearance of Simone. She looks very convincingly like what we'd expect, I guess, from a virtual actress.
And again, Simone is very similar to Sid 6.7, isn't she? Because she's a composite personality of lots of different people. In this case, it's of every single famous actress you could ever think of that's been in Hollywood or on screen. So she's got like a bit of Meryl Streep, a bit of Audrey Hepburn. And there's one scene in particular where Al Pacino's talking to the movie producer, and she's reading an article of all the different things which Simone is like, all the different actresses, sorry. And then Taransky goes, oh yeah, she is pretty much that. Like, you're almost right. You've almost got all of the bits.
Yeah. The grace of Grace Kelly and stuff like that, wasn't it? And he's tweaking it. So unlike they make a point in Virtuosity, and we didn't talk about it, but they make a point that Sid has been raised in an almost human way. Like he's not programmed to be a composite of these personalities. How do they describe it? It was like all those serial killers were in the room and he was in his cot as a baby, and he just sort of became one of them through exposure. In Simone, Victor is able to dial up and dial down the amount of those actresses. And like the first one we see is that he thinks there's too much Meryl Streep, so he dials it down. And the idea that a director would ever dial down the amount of Meryl Streep in a virtual actor is insane, of course. You'd want to dial that up to the max. But then he adds in like little affectations that he likes. So Audrey Hepburn's little tweak of a earring in Breakfast at Tiffany's. I like that. I like that as a concept.
Yeah, because the idea that Victor is like, he's a director, he's an auteur, but he's incredibly cine literate as well. He knows all of these elements he wants to get in Simone to sort of create the perfect actress for these films he's making. But Simone is also his avatar as well, isn't she? Because I remember when I first saw this film, I think I only saw a bit of it, and I was just flicking through the channels, and I spent the whole time thinking that Simone's going to come to life. She's going to be like an AI. But that's not what this film is about. It's about Victor living almost vicariously through her.
Yeah, because he's creating his ideal actor, ideal actress, and ideal woman in a way. I think one of the biggest problems I had with the film actually was that Victor's implied view of actresses, women in film, is quite unpleasant. He has no respect for them. He just sees them as the prima donna divas, like what Winona Ryder's playing at the start of the film, and it's very disrespectful to people like Audrey Hepburn, Grace Kelly, Marilyn Monroe, who had all of these like fascinating and complex internal lives and are kind of reduced to just affectations that Victor sort of cherry picks. But I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing in the film, or just kind of it tells us something about Victor's shitty personality that he just wants to cherry pick the little gestures that he likes from one of these women. Yeah,
that's one of the things which I was worried about going into the film, because in the opening moments, Victor is this character who could go one of either way. He could be sort of like, he could get a bit sort of Weinstein with everything. But I think one of the ways they kind of get around that as well to an extent is having Catherine Keener as the producer, and her playing this producer role kind of gives it a different kind of side to things. So it's showing that there is sort of like there's a woman who's in charge of everything when it comes down to it. She might be as clueless as everybody else in terms of like knowing who's in her film, but she's keeping an eye on the money, and she's really sort of the one in charge.
Yeah, Catherine Keener is great in this. I think she's a very underrated actor. She is excellent in everything that she's in, and she brings just so much depth to. She's only ever in like supporting roles, isn't she? But she always brings so much to those supporting characters that really illuminate the scenes, and she's perfect in this in terms of that same thing, illuminating the comedic aspects of Victor, in that she's believable, but she's also kind of always pushing the engine that is generating Simone as a kind of output product.
Yeah, she's got her eye on the prize, hasn't she? She knows what she wants. She wants to make money from the company, so she's always thinking about that.
But she has these lovely moments of just like pure obliviousness as well. Like she's fawning over Simone in the same way that everyone else is, even though she's in this position of power. She's captivated by the same thing that the whole world is captivated by Simone, which is this just intangible brilliance of her performances that work quite well, actually, that are done quite well in the film, the way they're presented. But, like there's a scene where Victor presents her with a photo of her next to Simone as a gift from like a party, and she doesn't even question it. She's not like, I wasn't 2 feet away from Simone. That never happened. She's like, oh.
She was like, oh, Simone was that close all the time. And it was like, no, she wasn't.
And she does this little, like she's sort of stroking her hair as if like she's very pleased by just being like next to her in a photo. That kind of reflected beauty, I guess, that people are seeing in Simone.
And again, it's Victor controlling the way people perceive her, which is so much like the center point of this film. So, I mean, when their film first takes off, he does a toast, and he's toasting himself, and he toasts to the death of real, and he's having this whole conversation between him and Simone when he's pretending to be Simone, which is mad, but he's kind of like, he's properly invested in this character, but he is controlling the way other people are perceiving her, like I said. And this like spirals out of control, doesn't it? Because it goes from just being an actress who is unknown to everyone to a singer to this like all-encompassing celebrity that everybody knows and wants to see and be around.
Yeah, he's trying to keep a lid on it for the first half of the movie. He basically creates himself as manager, agent, director, producer to Simone. He's like the Colonel to Elvis. He's got complete control over this starlet's life, and he thinks he can just get away with that and keep a lid on that. But that's where the kind of farce comes into it, that it just escalates, that he has to tell lots of little lies to make people believe that she's a real person, and those lies get more and more elaborate and insane to the point where he's rolling around on a bed. There's lots of scenes of Al Pacino wearing lipstick and kissing various things to leave lipstick marks. And I absolutely love the scene where he's sitting next to a doll, a mannequin version of Simone in a car on a freeway while also conducting a phone call with Elaine. It was like something out of Frasier. Like I could imagine Frasier getting himself into a similar sort of scrape where he has to pretend to, drive a car and have a phone call at the same time.
I can't lie. There were moments when I was watching this, and I watched this on my own, and I burst out laughing just because it's so ridiculous.
Valerie, what are you running from?
From Valerie.
Valerie, no!
Would this be one of the first comedies that Al Pacino did as well? Because I know that he's done a lot in the intervening years, but there is a moment where, I mean, like Pacino and De Niro get talked about a lot at the same time because of the way they came up together, but they both went into comedy, and there's a lot you can get out of a famous, serious actor doing their first comedies, and the sheer hilariousness of like, what if Al Pacino was being silly? He was the Godfather, he was Michael Corleone, and now what would it be like if he was driving a car with a dummy in it and pretending to have a phone call? That's the whole joke. But there is a window of opportunity where you can just get away with that. Where it stops being funny, that it's just like Al Pacino being silly, and that just works on its own merit. And I feel like this film was, if not the first, certainly early in that period for Pacino.
Yeah, and obviously Al Pacino can be incredibly picky about what he's going to go for.
Maybe he was in 2002. I don't think he is anymore.
But I mean, at that point, like he's I mean, whatever sort of like year it is, Al Pacino still has a lot of credentials. Like everyone knows him. He's a bankable star, as they say in this film.
Yeah, and Simone becomes the bankable star for Victor.
Exactly. And I kept thinking it's got a lot of sort of similarities between sort of gaming and the way we view social media again, sort of similar to how Virtuosity did sort of like the gaming and the media aspects of it. And this idea of creating your own image. And I mean, this is what like social media influencers, Instagram people, like this is your whole career is about creating that image and the way people perceive you. And it's interesting sort of seeing how that just escalates, because in a way, Victor is catfishing everyone, isn't he?
Yeah, he is. Yeah, and that builds and builds and builds. And Simone is like his player character for this game that he's playing with the world. And he's into it. He acknowledges it later in the film. He has like another one of these weird conversations, a heart-to-heart conversation with Simone, which is a heart-to-heart conversation with himself, of course. And he admits that it was all, it was all for me. It's like Walter White in Breaking Bad. I did it for me. He admits all of that, and it all comes out. And yeah, she's his avatar for that game of catfishing that he's been playing. And it reminds me of like, there's moments that are like, I don't know if this was happening in video games in 2002, but when you start a new game on like Skyrim or Fallout and you can spend like an hour just like tweaking the haircut. Whenever I play these games, I always get caught in that. And then as soon as it's done, I'm like, oh, that was a huge waste of my time. I'm never even going to look at this character again. But the way that Simone is on the screen, and he's, the first time they don't really do that, but later on when he does the big concert, he's playing around with the outfits, and he's like, oh, nah, not that one. Do it in a different colour, try a different dress. And he's like tweaking it in a very similar way to like creating your character in an RPG.
And so it's gone from sort of just this actress that he's got in his films and sort of like trying to finish his films to a whole different thing, because it's no longer about the art that he's trying to create as the film goes on. He turns her into a pop star, and he does this whole hologram concert with her. So he starts to lose himself to this idea of Simone. And this sort of culminates in the award ceremony where he does the speech as Simone, thanking everyone, but forgets to thank himself. And then everyone picks up on this except for him. So he's just sort of like, he's lost himself to this character.
Yeah, and his reaction is great there, because he genuinely looks confused and upset that he hasn't been thanked, which is genuinely what Victor would feel. He would be confused and upset that he forgot to thank himself, but also if she were real, he would be confused and upset that he wasn't thanked for his contribution. It's a great little moment that works really well for the character. That shot of Al Pacino sort of sadly looking at the empty chair that Simone should be in with a huge placard. I love the fact that, this placard is like 4 foot tall, sitting in the chair of her massive face. And he's just sort of staring at it like, oh, what have I done?
And then he sort of like, the resentment starts to set in, doesn't it? He's kind of like, well, you've become such a star now, and everyone's forgotten about me, who created you. So he tries to sort of sabotage her. And he does everything he can to sort of to put her name into disrepute. He creates this film, which is amazing, called I Am Pig. What did you think about the ways that he tries to sabotage her image and how it backfires?
I love the way that the public are just like impervious to his attempts to ruin her name. They all just go absolutely crazy at the pig film that she's created. He credits this art film to her as director, her directorial debut, and people are horrified watching it, but as soon as the credits roll, they're like, yes. And the interview she does where she's just like, it's a bit Courtney Love, right? She's kind of bedraggled and smoking, and the hosts are just like, well, she's unconventional, we like her because she's not like other stars. It was great. It was like it really just, it descends into like a South Park or Simpsons kind of ludicrous scenario where he just can't break this bubble, and the public are just so brainwashed by the cult of celebrity around Simone that he's inadvertently created. Well, inadvertently and then deliberately, in the kind of middle part of the film, inflated and created. He just can't penetrate that, and they're all just completely along for the ride.
Yeah, and it's completely changed tone as well, hasn't it? Because there's a moment in sort of like in the middle section where it almost kind of descends into a bit of a rom-com for a second. Like the moment you're talking about with the dummy in the car and he's trying to get back with his ex-wife. I wasn't sure where they were going to go with that, but they kind of like sideline that aspect to continue along this whole celebrity exploration that the film is going about.
Yeah, the celebrity exploration is the only glue that's holding this film together. And I think another valid criticism that you could level against this film is that outside of that, there are narrative threads that are just extremely loose and get tied together at the end in quite a lazy way to just get things wrapped up. But it's not what the film is about. It's a heightened reality. It's a comedy, and those things are just there in service of the comedy, I think. And when you make a comedy film, you do just wrap up the kind of the relationships between the characters, because it's just a thing that you have to do at the end of a movie. I don't think it's terribly important to what Andrew Niccol was trying to write about.
This is a classic case, isn't it, of technology in search of an artist. Someone with integrity, someone with vision, someone who can see beyond this irrational allegiance to flesh and blood, someone who can see that with the rise in the price of a real actor and the fall in the price of a fake, that the scales have tipped naturally in favor of the fake.
Because obviously we are looking at virtual reality in this series, and this episode is about VR constructed people. So celebrity as a VR construct is an interesting concept as well, because basically the whole way that we view these celebrities, it's virtual, isn't it? You never meet these people. You only see them on a screen. You might read about them in a paper, or more likely on your phone, in a news feed, on social media. So it's another way of looking at virtual reality and how we can manipulate it so easily.
Yeah, and the expectations of the public and exactly what the public want from these constructed ideals of celebrities. I mean, it's interesting, you mentioned social media. I think that may have changed the relationship we have with celebrities, because they can speak to us in a more direct way if they want to. They can also have a PR team to just manage the whole thing. But they can kind of establish rapport with their fans in a different way. I was saying before that it made me slightly uncomfortable sometimes with the perception of like a Hollywood starlet and exactly what Victor thought of that kind of a person. But at the same time, I think it's fair to say that it's poking fun a little bit at what America wants from its starlets and exactly how much personality they are allowed to have in a pre-social media age. Like she goes on a goodwill mission to the third world. That's kind of the extent that a Hollywood actress might be able to have in terms of having a personality if you're going to be a big star. Because people want to see them do good in the world, and that's what they're allowed to do. But beyond that, they don't get to have much of a personality.
Exactly, and it's like this. Have you heard of VTubers?
What is that? Just a YouTuber?
Yeah. So basically, it's like a virtual YouTuber. So it's become a big thing now. Yeah. So they're basically they're doing exactly what's happening in Simone. They're creating this virtual character, and then doing
horrifying. Yeah,
but they're doing these YouTube videos. So it's Simone has become like a real thing people are doing, but people know it's a simulation, but they're getting as much of a following as Simone could have got.
Yeah, there's like one really famous one, isn't there? There's like a League of Legends one, I think, who just exists to promote League of Legends, but she also has like a whole narrative and false life. I mean, it's very creepy and weird the way that people will interact with this character who responds, but it's a team of people who are managing the personality and are responding in character.
I mean, for instance, if you put VTubers into Google, one of the first things that comes up is people also ask, are VTubers real people?
Oh dear.
But then straight after that is, how much do VTubers make? So again, it's a commodity. So people are trying to make money out of this virtual, this simulated image.
Yeah, it reminds me of, I think Black Mirror did this whole thing a little bit better with Waldo, the episode with Waldo, where doesn't he become he becomes like a politician, basically. He's kind of like speaking truth to power to politicians, and then he becomes this whole cult of personality in himself. And the relationship between the performer and the virtual character becomes tense.
Because in Waldo it was about his character completely took on a different shape when other people were in charge of it. So then it all ends in this like dystopian society that's created, but with a virtual character who's in charge, but is controlled by the government.
But interestingly, that's where Simone ends, isn't it? Because there's a whole did he kill Simone? And he's then trying to prove more farcical stuff where he's trying to prove that Simone was never real and all that. And he's dug himself such a hole, but his family saves him, and they share control of Simone, but it doesn't go down that Black Mirror route, does it? It's actually more like salvation for Victor, because he's completely lost himself in this avatar. Then to have his family kind of share the burden and bring him back to reality saves him in a way.
It does have that edge to it though, because Elaine says to Victor when they're in the limousine, when he's getting out of prison, why stop there with just one character? Why not create a whole cast? So they're taking this idea of Simone to a whole different level. And then the very sort of the final scene, like you said, is where you're seeing Simone saying she's having a baby and she's getting into politics. So they're starting to create this entire reality around her with extra supporting cast, but they are in control of it. The movie company is in control. So they are going to be taking over politics potentially, taking over the world. So it's a very dangerous balance where entertainment becomes as powerful as those in charge of the government, which again is kind of like Trump, isn't it?
Yeah, and again it's Elaine being that kind of savvy character that understands the power of the thing that he's created. Because I mean she's kind of approaching it in the same way, isn't she? Like, she knew that Simone was just a creation, but she thought she was a real person. But she understood that these real people who come into her studio just become these created figures that they can manipulate and then sell movies on. And she's just able to flip that switch and say, okay, great, now I know she's a VR construct. I can actually have even more control over what she's doing and what she appears as and how she seems. And let's make more. Let's add a baby. Let's build on this character and do even more with it, because I can sell movies and more, enter politics, gain power. She's got this savvy edge to her that she's able to flip on very quickly.
Yeah, it's a really crazy sort of way to end the film as well. And it's that creating a virtual reality or a simulation that people don't know is a simulation. People don't know that it's not, that somebody else is in charge of it.
Yeah, I was a little bit disappointed that we never saw a male counterpart to Simone. I was kind of hoping at some point it was going to, because like I was saying, the kind of awkwardness with what women are allowed to be in Hollywood, I was kind of hoping that we would then see the flip side of that and have a Hollywood hunk that's also made out of the software that he's inherited, to just give a bit of balance to the sort of stuff that was making me feel a bit uncomfortable. But yeah, they go in this completely other direction with the idea of a simulated family around Victor and Simone.
Definitely. And I think sort of the politics angle is really interesting, and it's something which I would never have thought of this film would have ended with.
Yeah, I mean, what would that reflect in 2002? It's post Reagan, so the idea of a huge movie star going into politics is not unusual. And when did Arnie start his sort of journey towards gubernatorial glory.
Yeah, it can't have been too far off from around about this time. So it's not entirely uncommon for a Hollywood star to enter politics. But it always seems so mad, just someone that you've seen in a film or a TV show to suddenly be in charge of government.
Yeah. It shouldn't seem mad at this point, should it? We've seen enough examples of it happening.
We've seen a lot of craziness.
We love to not learn our lesson, don't we?
So that's about it for Simone, and that's about it for this episode. So next week on the show, we will be expanding this idea of VR constructed people, and we'll be taking a look at users and avatars. So which two films are we going to be taking a look at next week, Matt, to explore that theme?
Well, we trailed this in the intro episode, and I'm very excited to be returning to the world of Tron. We're going to be looking at Tron Legacy from 2010, and we're going to be pairing that up with Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle, the 2017 reboot of the classic family fantasy film from 1995. That's going to be a lot of fun.
And I think this theme of users and avatars is going to be really interesting. I mean, we've talked about it this episode. It's going to be interesting to see what happens next time.
Yeah, and those films are more overtly about that relationship between the users and the avatars, aren't they?
Yeah, and I've got to be honest, I just want to see more light cycles again.
Oh, yeah. So in the meantime, if you want to get in touch with us, you can send us an email at journeythroughsci-fi@gmail.com, or you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. If you look up Journey Through Sci-Fi, you'll be able to find us there.
Yes, we exist in all virtual realms. If you want to support the podcast, you can find us on Patreon. We've got exclusive bonus content for all of our patrons. So if you head over to patreon.com/Journey Through Sci-Fi, you'll be able to find us there. And a special shout out to our latest patron, Catherine. Thank you very much for your pledge. We appreciate it a lot.
And if you're not able to do that, you can always leave us a nice review. Send us a review and let us know in the review who you would make a virtual actor construct out of.
That's it for today. We'll see you next time.